Okay, in our last video, we were discussing these prophetic dreams that Arthur ignores, and he is consequently he is mortally wounded by his son Mordred, and Arthur's death is interesting in a couple of ways. Um, in the in that he doesn't die immediately. He is given. He gives Sir Bedivere, or Bedivere, this final order, and he's really concerned about Excalibur, his sword, and why is the sword so important? Well, the sword is what makes him king of England to begin with. Because he's able to pull it out of the stone. It was the sword of his father, and he's got to return it somehow. It's kind of this symbol of his power, and it has to. He has no one to really kind of leave it to, and it's interesting because he says to Sir Bedivere, take Excalibur to the lake and throw it in. And Sir Bedivere fails twice to do that. I mean, once he hides it in a tree, once he does something else with it, but he fails to do what he's told. And Arthur, again, we see the lack of his leadership, the inability of his knights to kind of follow his authority, even in his death. I mean, his final dying wish is to, have this sword thrown into the lake, and they can't even handle and manage to do that. I think it says a lot about his leadership, but it also says a lot about his knights and their individual kind of desires. So he fails twice to do so, and Arthur is once again says, take this sword. He calls him a traitor, and calling him a traitor is enough for Bedivere to finally obey, and a hand comes out, grabs the sword, and then finally Arthur is taken by a barge full of ladies to Avalon, this kind of heavenly realm, to heal. And it's interesting to note that we had Mallory kind of dismisses some of this, or kind of puts this in, well, this is all we know about his death, and all we know about his death comes from this night. Some think that he's really not dead, but he's waiting to return, which kind of parallels Arthur to this kind of Jesus figure. But we essentially here have the death of a king, this dissension into ultimate chaos, collapsed order, the end of Camelot. And of course, he says that we get this sense based on what's engraved on his tombstone, that he is the once and future king. So this kind of idyllic Camelot could potentially be restored at some point, but which I think is interesting, because that's kind of the hope for Mallory. It's kind of the hope for all of the people of England who are so tired of living in this kind of uncertainty, unstable time that is the end of the 14th century. So, but we have this the assumed end of Camelot, but in Arthur's death, I think Arthur's death is merely a formality, because Camelot was doomed long before Arthur's death. He's unable to control his knights and the events of his kingdom. His ethics fall prey to the situation. He shows favoritism. He blinds himself. I mean, he's blinded by his anger. He's unable to see that people he loves can and will betray him. And we essentially have this kind of wasteland of characters who are all to blame. I mean, including Arthur himself. And nothing, not love, not courage, not fidelity, faithfulness, worthiness, nothing can save Camelot. It is doomed from the beginning, and we've seen that since in our first and opening about the conspiracy between Lancelot and Guinevere. And even if this chivalric code could have held under the pressure of these kind of demands for perfection, none of the knights are good enough. Not even the sole survivor, Bedivere. He fails to obey and to be loyal. So really, Arthur's not worthy enough, and none of the knights are worthy enough because they kind of learn the lesson that Gawain does in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. They're human. They all fall short of that perfect ideal. So Arthur is not good enough to sustain Camelot and those ideal, especially given such times of corruption. So Camelot is no more. Arthur is no more, and I want to kind of talk about how Arthur's death compares to the death of Lancelot and Guinevere. So, what happens in our final little thing? Guinevere is sent to a nunnery. Essentially, she is punished for and I mean, she kind of deserves this punishment. She's been an unfaithful wife. She's been the cause of all of this. Well, I don't know if she's the cause, but she has certainly played her part in the demise and the downfall of Camelot. But she also repents and voices her desire never to see Lancelot again. She hopes that she dies without ever seeing his face, and she does die without ever seeing his face again. But Lancelot, um, he goes and he sees her on her after she has died, and he is excessively emotional at her death. And this hermit really reproaches him for being so sad over the death of this woman, this terrible woman. And he says, my sorrow is for myself. My sorrow is for my fault and my pride, a la Gawain. And he seeks repentance as much as he seeks this he seeks repentance for his own fault and for his own pride, but his repentance is also kind of an indication of this measure of love that he has for Guinevere and Arthur. And where Guinevere dies with no one mourning her, saving Lancelot, Lancelot, who bears just as much of the blame, I mean, he's a traitor, is given this elaborate death scene with angels and the last rites, and he's so perfect that his body doesn't stink. It gives off this kind of sweet odor, and he's mourned and put on display for 15 days. And he's given this really kind of royal eulogy by Sir Ector, and it's it's kind of really over the top. I mean, note the superlatives of this kind of elevation of Lancelot at his death. The head of all Christian knights, never matched of earthly knights' hands, the truest friend, the truest lover, the kindest, meekest, goodliest. All of these superlatives about how great and wonderful Lancelot is/was. And the irony here in all of that is Lancelot is only probably one of those things. He's a good lover. He is not this kind of he's not this knight that Mallory wants us to believe him to be. And what's interesting is to look at his death in side by side with Arthur's death. His death is given more acclaim, more reference than the kings. And he inspires these knights to go out and continue fighting. And and essentially, this whole book that's dedicated to Arthur's rule, the realm of his kingdom, it's called The Death of Arthur, right? La Morte d'Arthur, The Death of Arthur. And it ends really with the death of Lancelot. And Lancelot is given um, this really royal send off, this really knightly, or not knightly, but regal send away, and not Arthur. Why? Why have so much focus on Lancelot, his greatness, his worthiness, his life and his death? Well, I think it goes back to at the end where we have this really kind of weird request that Mallory has for us as readers. He says, "Pray for me." Or if I'm dead, and he's dead, we have to pray for his soul. Why? And in some ways, I think Mallory praises Lancelot so much because he sees himself as a Lancelot figure. If if I mean, I think Mallory writes himself in the role of Lancelot. He is a traitor. He's been put on this kind of opposite side, and he has these displaced loyalties and um, all of that. And um, Lancelot at the end, his success is that he seeks repentance. And I think that this kind of goes back to what we see in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Part of what Gawain's success through his failure is that he confesses, he seeks repentance, and he shows us what it means to be kind of this ideal. And not dissimilarly, I think that he gives Mallory gives Lancelot this repentance, this honor, and this glory because he's looking for the same kind of repentance that he gives Lancelot. So, why does this story matter? Well, because it really is all about I mean, it is kind of the culmination of everything that we've talked about this semester, and it really gives us an indication of where we are headed moving forward. So let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. I'm interested to see what you guys think of La Morte d'Arthur and how we are supposed to look at Arthur and his role as a king, Lancelot, and his role as a knight, and really what happens when these kind of bonds are really kind of put to the test by our own selfish human desires. So let me know what you think. I will be in touch, and I look forward to moving into our second unit.